Okay, good afternoon. What I'd like to do is to read a section today to you from the prologue in the first chapter of this book by Daniel Klein called Travels with Epicurus. Now, I don't know if you know Daniel Klein. He's got a BA from Harvard. He's 83 now, so he's like us. He's getting older. And he spent his life, he had a BA in philosophy, but he spent his life writing things for TV shows. He wrote TV comedies. He wrote mystery novels. But he always wanted to really spend time explaining what classical philosophy could really mean to people in terms of their lives, because he loved the stuff. So he wrote this book in this one actually is from 2012, Travels with Epicurus, where he decides he's going to try to take classical philosophy and see if he can use it to have, as he says, a fulfilled life as an old person. See if there's any meaning in it for him. And I think you'll like it. He's a very individual voice, and I'm going to read you, as I said, his prologue and his first chapter, which I think stand alone. Okay, the table at Dimitri's taverna. He is sitting at a wooden table at the far rim of the terrace of Dimitri's taverna in the village of Kamini on the Greek island of Hydra. Tucked behind his right ear is a sprig of wild lavender that, with considerable effort, he stooped to pick on his way here. From time to time, usually during lulls in conversation with his table mates, he removes the herb, takes a few sniffs of it, and then returns it to its resting spot. Leaning against the table to his right is an olive wood cane topped with a pewter caryatid, a maiden of Caryae, the ancient Peloponnesian village, where the temple was dedicated to the goddess Artemis. He takes this cane with him wherever he goes, though he does not require it for walking. His gait is slow but steady. The cane is an emblem, a sign of his age. It is also a recognition of his life spent as a man. The ancient Greek word for cane refers to a rod that soldiers used for striking enemies. That his cane handle is a comely and shapely maiden may have some personal significance too. In his younger days, he was known as a connoisseur of beautiful women. I nod to him from my seat under the taverna's awning, where I have been reading a book titled The Art of Happiness, or The Teachings of Epicurus. He nods back with a slight tilt of his white-haired head, a tilt of dignified congeniality, and then returns to conversations with his friends. His name is Tasso, and he is 72 years old. I have known him for many years now. Although Tasso looks every year his age, his face and neck are covered with a fine crosshatch of deep lines, here he is still considered a handsome man, a handsome old man. He is said to wear his age on his face, a compliment. When the French philosopher Albert Camus wrote in his novel, The Fall, alas, after a certain age, every man is responsible for his own face, he too was voicing approval. A man's face tells the truth about him. The face a man acquires is the result of the choices he has made and the experiences that followed from those choices. The islanders say that on a man who has weathered challenging experiences, a finely seasoned face will emerge in old age. It is the face he has earned, and its raw beauty is the fully lived life it expresses. I eavesdrop on Tasso and his companions. As is their habit, they sit side by side and speak loudly to one another, so I have no difficulty hearing them. Although my Greek is rudimentary, I can catch the drift of their talk, a conversation that began before I arrived and will continue until the sun begins to drop behind the Peloponnese, just across the sea. It is aimless, cheerful chat, for the most part mundane. They talk about the sunlight, which is unusually hazy today, the new owner of a cheese stall in the market, their children and grandchildren, the state of political affairs in Athens. Occasionally one tells a story from his past, usually one his companions have heard before. The talk is punctuated by leisurely, comfortable silences as they gaze out the Peloponnesian Straits. I have returned to this Greek island on a personal quest. I am an old man myself now, 73, and I want to figure out the most satisfying way to live this stage of my life. Having spent over the years several extended periods in Greece, I believe I may find some clues in the way old people live here. The old folks of Hydra have always struck me as uncommonly content with their stages in life. I have also toted across the Atlantic a lean library of philosophy books, most by ancient Greek thinkers, some by 20th century existentialists, plus an assortment of other favorites, because I think I may find some clues in these two. Since I was a college student some 50 years ago, I have had an enduring interest in what the great philosophers have to say about how to live a valuable life. I remember that some of these thinkers had intriguing ideas about how to live a fulfilling old age, although it was not a subject that particularly attracted me when I still had youthful ambitions, not to mention boundless energy and more hair. The prospect of reading the ancient Greek philosophers while surrounded by the rocky, sunlit landscape where their ideas first flourished feels just right to me now. It was not a birthday epiphany or a shocking glimpse in the mirror that set the wheels of this personal journey turning. It was something far more prosaic, a visit to my dentist. After poking around in my mouth, Dr. Nocht earnestly informed me that due to normal age-appropriate atrophy of my jawbone, a row of my lower teeth needed to be removed and replaced with implants. The only alternative, he said, would be a denture plate without any stable teeth to anchor it. With the denture, I would be sentenced to a diet devoid of steaks and pork chops, to frequent embarrassing incidents when my false teeth would pop loose and come out of my mouth attached to, say, a piece of chocolate. And worse yet, I would have the unmistakable clunky smile of an old man. I immediately signed up for the implants. Back at home, I looked over my schedule for this procedure, a minimum of 7 visits to the nearest oral surgeon, a good hour's drive away. These were spaced out over the course of almost a year. A quick look on the web revealed that I could expect a few days of pain after each visit, not to mention an aggregate of several weeks during which I would basically subsist on baby food. And of course, I would be out some thousands of dollars. For what again? Pork chops? No embarrassing denture pop-outs? A more youthful smile? I then realized just how much those potential denture pops and that old mannish smile had figured into my instant decision to get the implants. But now those reasons did not make good sense to me. They did not seem to reflect my genuine values at this point in my life. In my early 70s, did I really care if I presented to the world an old man's goofy smile? And even more to the point, with my years of clear thinking and reasonable mobility declining as quickly as my jawbone, did I honestly want to dedicate an entire year to visits to an oral surgeon? I did not. And that was when I realized that, without thinking about it, I had been swept up in the current trend of trying to extend the prime of life well into the years that used to be called old age. My unwitting participation in this trend went far beyond mere cosmetic issues to include the very way I perceived the amount of gratifying life left to me. I had been doing some fuzzy math. I had been caught up in an epidemic of denial. Without realizing it, I had routinely been opting for what I have come to think of as youth implants. This new old age credo was everywhere I looked. If someone even casually mentioned that she was getting on in years, she was immediately chastened. "You're not old, you're still in your prime." She was informed that 70 is the new 50. She was admonished not to give in to old age. This creed urges people my age to keep setting new goals, to charge ahead into new ventures, to design new programs for self-improvement. We are advised that medicine and its promise of an extended lifespan have given us an unprecedented opportunity. We can spin out the prime of our lives indefinitely, and if we surrender to our old age, we are fools, or at worst, cowards. All around me, I saw many of my contemporaries remaining in their prime of life vocations, often working harder than ever. Others were setting off on expeditions to exotic destinations, copies of 1,000 Places to See Before You Die, tucked into their backpacks. Some were enrolling in classes in conversational French, taking up jogging, even signing up for cosmetic surgery and youth-enhancing hormone treatments. A friend of mine in her late 60s had not only undergone a facelift, but also elected to have breast implants. And one man my age told me that between his testosterone patch and 72-hour Cialis, he felt like a young buck again. Forever Young was my generation's theme song, and unreflectively, I had been singing it along with them. It certainly is not hard to see the appeal of the Forever Young movement. The prime of my life has been, on balance, very satisfying, so why stop now? Why not more of a good thing? And more, and more. But something about this new philosophy of old age does not sit right with me, and it took the prospect of those dental implants to prompt me to examine why. I suspect that if I were to take this popularly accepted route, I would miss out on something deeply significant. I would deny myself a unique and invaluable stage of life. I have deep-seated qualms about going directly from a protracted prime of life to old age, the now attenuated period of senility and infirmity that precedes death. I am seriously concerned that on that route I would miss for eternity ever simply being authentically and contentedly old. The problem is that I am not entirely sure what an authentic old person is or how he should live. But I do have some hunches, and it is with them I need to begin. At the very least, I believe that an authentic old man would be honest with himself about how much fully conscious and rational life he has left. He would want to use that time in the best and most appropriate way. I also suspect he might sense that this stage of life offers meaningful possibilities that were never before available to him. But beyond that, I only have questions, and that is why I have returned to this Greek island with a suitcase full of philosophy books. One of Tasso's companions signals Dmitri to bring another bottle of Retsina and a few plates of mezes, some olives, stuffed grape leaves, yogurt, cucumber, and garlic dip. They now arrange themselves around the table so all are in reach of the food. I have yet to see Dmitri present them with a bill, and I believe he never does. The men will simply place a few coins on the table when they leave, old man rates. Tasso pulls a deck of cards from his pocket, and they begin to play Prefa, their preferred card game, with one of the four sitting out each hand and taking up any slack in the conversation. And I turn back to my book about Epicurus. Chapter 1, The Old Greeks' Olive Trees. Epicurus grew up on another Aegean island, Samos, 200 miles east of here, nearer to Anatolia, or Asia Minor. He was born in 341 BCE, only 80 years after Plato, but was little influenced by him. What Epicurus mainly had on his mind was the question of how to live the best possible life, especially considering that we only have one of them. Epicurus did not believe in an afterlife. This seems like the most fundamental philosophical question, the question of all questions. But students of the history of Western philosophy are often disheartened to find that as the centuries went on, that question began to take a back seat to philosophical questions that were more pressing, like Martin Heidegger's mind-blowing question that used to make me laugh out loud with incomprehension. Why is there something at all rather than nothing? And the epistemological problem, how do we know what is real? Epicurus certainly speculated about the nature of reality, but he did so fundamentally in service of his ultimate question: how does one make the most of one's life? And it's not a bad question. Epicurus' answer, after many years of deep thought, was that the best possible life one could live is a happy one, a life filled with pleasure. At first look, this conclusion seems like a no-brainer, the sort of wisdom found on the side of a box of celestial seasonings tea. But Epicurus knew this was only a starting point because it raised the more troublesome and perplexing questions of what constitutes a happy life, which pleasures are truly gratifying and enduring, and which are fleeting and lead to pain, plus the monumental question of why and how we often thwart ourselves from attaining our happiness. I have to admit that I experienced a pang of disillusionment when I first realized that Epicurus was not an Epicurean, at least not in the way we currently use that term. That is, to mean a supreme sensualist with gourmet appetites. Let me put it this way. Epicurus preferred a bowl of plain boiled lentils to a plate of roasted pheasant infused with mastiha, a reduction painstakingly made from the sap of a nut tree, a delicacy slaves prepared for noblemen in ancient Greece. This was not the result of any democratic inclination, but rather Epicurus' hankering for personal comfort, which clearly included comfort foods. The pheasant dish titillated the taste buds, but Epicurus was not a sensualist in that sense. He was not looking for dazzling sensory excitement. No, bring on those boiled lentils. For one thing, he took great pleasure in the food he had grown himself, and that was part of the gratification of eating the lentils. For another, he had a Zen-like attitude about senses. If he fully engaged in tasting the lentils, he would experience all the subtle delights of their flavor, delights that rivaled those of the more extravagantly spiced fare. And another of this dish's virtues was that it was a snap to prepare. Epicurus was not into tedious, mindless work like, say, dripping mastiha onto a slow-roasting pheasant. Some Athenians saw Epicurus and his ideas as a threat to social stability. A philosophy that set personal pleasure as life's highest goal and that openly advocated self-interest could dissolve the glue they believed held the republic together. Epicurus' brand of self-centeredness, they argued, did not make for good citizenship. But Epicurus and his followers could not have cared less what their detractors thought. For starters, Epicurus had little interest in the political process. Indeed, he believed that to enjoy a truly gratifying life, one should withdraw completely from the public sphere. Society would function remarkably well if everyone simply adopted a live and let live policy, with each man seeking his own happiness. This followed naturally from one of Epicurus' basic tenets. It is impossible to live wisely and live well without living a pleasant life. Epicurus was a man who lived his philosophy, and this entailed forming a proto-commune, the garden, on the outskirts of Athens, where he and a small and devoted group of friends lived simply, grew vegetables and fruit, ate together, and talked endlessly, mostly, of course, about Epicureanism. Anyone who wished to join them was welcome, as evidenced by the words carved over the garden's gate. "Stranger, here you will do well to tarry. Here our highest good is pleasure. The caretaker of this abode, a kindly host, will be ready for you. He will welcome you with bread and serve you with water in abundance. And with these words, have you not been well entertained?" Not exactly a gourmet menu, but the price was right and the company intriguing. Remarkably, contrary to the prevailing mores of Greece in Epicurus' era, women were also well received in the garden, where they were treated as equals in philosophical discussion. Even prostitutes were occasionally present at the table, feeding the Athenian gossip that Epicurus and his followers were wanton hedonists. But this was clearly not the case. Epicurus much preferred tranquil pleasures to wild ones. The simple truth was that, unlike the other Hellenistic philosophies of that period, Epicureanism espoused and practiced egalitarianism of both gender and social class. Although most of Epicurus' original manuscripts have now been lost or destroyed, it is believed he wrote over 300 books, yet only 3 letters and a few sets of aphorisms survive intact. His philosophy spread throughout Greece in his own time and later took Italy by storm, particularly when the Roman poet Lucretius set down the basic Epicurean principles in his great work, The Nature of Things. In no small part, the perpetuation of Epicurus' philosophy was due to his own foresight and pocketbook. In his last will, he endowed a school to carry on his teachings. Epicurus believed that old age was the pinnacle of life, the best it gets. In the collection known as the Vatican Sayings, so named because the manuscript was discovered in the Vatican Library, he is recorded as saying, "It is not the young man who should be considered fortunate, but the old man who has lived well, because the young man in his prime wanders much by chance, vacillating in his beliefs, while the old man has docked in the harbor, having safeguarded his true happiness." The idea of being an old man safe in the harbor buoys me up as I sit under Dimitri's awning, pondering the best way to spend this stage of my life. It is the notion of being free from vacillating beliefs that gets to me. My understanding from Epicurus' other teaching is that he is also referring to the young man's vacillating pursuits, the ones that follow from his vacillating beliefs. Epicurus is pointing to what the Zen Buddhists call the emptiness of striving. And in our culture, striving is the hallmark of a man still in his prime. The same goes for those of us who embrace the forever young credo. We don't give up setting new goals for ourselves, new ambitions to fulfill while we can. Many forever youngsters are driven by the frustration of not having fully achieved the goals they dreamed of attaining when they were younger. They see their final years as a last chance to grab some elusive brass ring. I became particularly aware of this phenomenon recently when the 50th anniversary report of my college class arrived in the mail. One classmate, a highly successful lawyer and part-time theater and culture reporter for the Wall Street Journal, wrote, "Every day I think about what I haven't done and I get anxious. That I remain in relatively good health is a great blessing, but it's also part of why I'm not sufficiently driven to finish the novels, plays, and nonfiction stewing in my head. But there's time, I hope." We all hope that, don't we? That nothing is too late refrain is certainly tempting. We septuagenarians just might be at the top of our game, our creative juices overflowing. Would Epicurus want them dammed up? Would he have sacrificed the classical masterpiece Oedipus Rex just so Sophocles could sit happily in a harbor? That sounds like a terrible waste. Still, there is no rest for the striver. Just beyond the completion of each goal on our life achievement bucket list looms another goal, and then another. Meanwhile, of course, the clock is ticking, quite loudly in fact. We become breathless, and we have no time left for the calm and reflective appreciation of our twilight years, no deliciously long afternoons sitting with friends or listening to music or musing about the story of our lives, and we will never get another chance for that. It is not an easy decision. For me, it is Epicurus' overall assessment of the qualities of a truly satisfying life that sheds the brightest sunshine on what a good old age might be. High on his list of the ways we thwart happiness by binding ourselves to the constraints of the commercial world. Epicurus may have predated Madison Avenue by a few millennium, but he already detected the commercial world's uncanny ability to make us think of stuff we need and don't need, and as the world of commerce keeps chugging along, to need ever more and newer stuff. But when shopping for the latest thing, Epicurus' all-important life of tranquil pleasure is nowhere to be found. One of my favorite of Epicurus' aphorisms is, "Nothing is enough for the man for whom enough is too little." In Epicurus' view, true happiness is bargain, like, say, boiled lentils or a yogurt dip. In serene old age, who really feels deprived if he can't feast on slow-roasted pheasant? Or for that matter, the poached salmon with truffles my wife and I dined on just before my departure from Greece. Go with the simple pleasures, Epicurus says. They are not only less expensive, they are less taxing on the old body. Yet when Epicurus writes, "We must free ourselves from the prison of everyday affairs," he has more on his mind than just freeing ourselves from the necessary acquisition of unnecessary stuff. It is the business of dedicating our lives to business that he is warning us against, starting with the obvious restraints of having a boss who tells us what to do, how to do it, and what is wrong with the way we are currently doing it. Even if one is the boss, as many of my forever young friends are, one's freedom remains constrained by the politics of having to deal with other people. One still has to tell them what to do, to negotiate with them and motivate them. One is still imprisoned. Forsaking the world of commerce, that is, giving up one's day job, may have all been well and good in the garden in 380 BCE. And I do have to wonder if a frequent guest at Epicurus' table, the financier Idomeneus, didn't pitch in to purchase the goods that couldn't be grown in their communal garden. But it feels like a tougher choice these days. In today's terms, Epicurus would advocate a kind of 60s getting by on nothing lifestyle, one that, for better or worse, few of us were willing to embrace fully to attain the perfect freedom we wanted when we were younger. Heaven knows I tried. Back in the late 60s, when the mantra of my former professor Timothy Leary, "turn on, tune in, drop out," reverberated in the world, I quit my job writing for television shows in New York and came for the first time to this very place, Hydra. Living on money I had saved, I did nothing for an entire year but sit in tavernas with locals and other dropouts, drink ouzo, chase after women, and stare off into the middle distance. That long ago year on Hydra was supremely enjoyable. I have no regrets about it, but truth to tell, I gradually became bored with myself. I yearned to get busy. I wanted to be engaged with the world. I wanted to make something of myself. And so I returned to the world of commerce, although my attraction to the Epicurean life never left me. Now sitting at Dimitri's taverna, I see that it is Tasso's turn to skip the hand of Prepha. He stands, cane in hand, and ambles to the seaward side of the terrace, where he watches the ferry from Hermonia appear from behind Dorcos, a stark, uninhabited, whale-shaped island that lies between here and the Peloponnese. This ferry is one of the last of the slow-moving vessels here. For decades, one of the most popular boats has been the hydrofoil from Piraeus, a hermetic sardine can of a conveyance for getting hurriedly to a place where time slows down. The creeping ferry from Hermione reminds me of the two trains that circumnavigate the Peloponnese, one in each direction. These also move at a pace not much faster than a middle-aged jogger. At times, these trains rattle on so leisurely that one could easily pick oranges from the trackside trees through the windows. No doubt this speaks of the not-up-to-snuffness of rural Greek technology, but it also speaks wonderfully to the Greek predilection for focusing on the pleasures of the journey rather than on the destination. On one of my many returns to Greece, I rode these trains around the perimeter of the Peloponnese with my wife and daughter. It was the year 2000, and Greece, after failing to qualify for entry into the euro as currency in 1999, was trying again. My wife, who is from Holland, surveyed the scene outside our window with a sardonic eye, spotting inefficiencies everywhere. "Look at them," she would howl as we passed a group of 5 Greeks leisurely unloading a cartload of eggplants, bucket brigade style, several with cigarettes dangling from their lips. "These people aren't serious about the euro." Although she was smiling, she was half serious herself. Holland, of course, is the world capital of Calvinism. My daughter and I soon assigned her the name the Euro Inspector. Unsurprisingly, Epicurus' laid-back philosophy survives more thoroughly in Greece's rural areas than in its cities. Aegean islanders like to tell a joke about the prosperous Greek Athenian, the Greek American, who visits one of the islands on vacation. Out on a walk, the affluent Greek American comes upon an old Greek man sitting on a rock, sipping a glass of ouzo, and lazily staring at the sun sinking into the sea. The American notices that there are olive trees growing on the hills behind the old Greek, but that they are unattended, with olives just dropping here and there onto the ground. He asks the old man, "Who do the trees belong to?" "They're mine," the Greek says. "Don't you gather the olives?" the American asks. "I just pick one when I want one," the old man says. "But don't you realize that if you pruned the trees and picked the olives at their peak, you could sell them? In America, everybody is crazy about virgin olive oil, and they pay a damn good price for it." "What would I do with the money?" the old Greek says. "Why, you could build yourself a big house and hire servants and do everything for you. And then what would I do?" "Well, you could do anything you want." "You mean like sit outside and sip ouzo on the terrace?" Skip to the last section here. The sun has finally begun its descent, appearing to enlarge as it nears the horizon on the terrace, and to dim as its rays gradually become eclipsed by our planet. In its refracted beams cast a pale rose-colored glow onto the water, and all 4 men at Tasso's table finally suspend their conversation to watch daylight's finale. Epicurus was not afraid of death. He famously said, "Death is nothing to me, since where I am, death is not, and where death is, I am not." The absence of life is not evil. Death is no more alarming than the nothingness before birth. Later philosophers, especially Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher and theologian, took exception to Epicurus' dictum, finding it simplistic. After all, when we are still conscious of the fact that in the future we will no longer be, and that makes one hell of a difference. In fact, according to Kierkegaard, it is enough to strike an old man, young or old, with fear and trembling. Although all the men at Tasso's table are at least nominally Greek Orthodox Christians, a religion that promises a beatic afterlife to the godly, my guess is that, like most mortals, they are not entirely immune to this terror of death. Nonetheless, they would recognize the comfort in Epicurus' dying words to his friend Idomeneus. "On this blissful day, which is also the last of my life, I write this to you, my friend. My continual sufferings from bladder spasms and dysentery are so great that nothing can increase them. But I set above them all the gladness of mind at the memory of all our past conversations." So he goes on, and really in the rest of this book, he talks about other things. I love he's got a chapter on the fact that old people should learn to play. and old people should learn to have fun. It's a fascinating book. If you want to read the rest of it, I would recommend it. Yeah.